Hello. I am reading Who Will Be a Witness by Dr. Drew Hart again because I'm doing a book study with a fellow comrade in the faith. Um, and it's very interesting reading through this and probably any work a second time. But I'm going to read a quote that has hit me in a very particular way as I'm actually listening to it because I am listening to it on the Kindle. So Dr. Hart writes, once again, this experience raised all kinds of theological questions for me. Why and how does white identity work in relation to Christianity? In what way has Christian identity been consumed by a white supremacist imagination? If white supremacy and Western Christianity have fused together, what is required to begin severing them from each other? And since most of my white peers wouldn't normally talk about identifying as white, how do we disciple people beyond whiteness when they don't even see that they have been born captive to these social forces in the first place? That last sentence is really, I kind of stopped listening as the Kindle was reading it. I stopped listening after that because I just started thinking about that. Like, man, where do you start when somebody doesn't even know who they are or who they've been convinced that they are? So in this chapter, Dr. Hart is talking about American identity being conflated with Christian identity. And kind of sewn together with white supremacy. And when someone, and he's had this experience, in a university setting as a student, watching his peers not be willing to even listen to someone challenge that reality. And the question is so good, but they don't even know. Like these students who, like he says, wouldn't even normally talk about being white. And this experience he had was years ago. So now it might be different, given all the conversations we're having around race and identity and things like that. But I think even now in 2021, there are still people who are like, well, we always got to talk about race. Why does it always have to be about race? If you're saying that, I would bet money that you have never had to talk about race, as opposed to being someone where it's always about your race. You come in and that's how you're perceived. That's the filter through which you're perceived, and that's how you're dealt with. That's how you are categorized in society. And if you never have to pay attention to that because everything is set up for you and your racialized context to thrive, you don't have to think about it. There's no reason because it's built for you. And even in that context, at what point do we get people to understand? Do we get white people to understand that in their identity as being white, well, number one, that's whiteness is not it. Like there's more to you than that. Number two, you haven't had to deal with that. And number three, you're captive to what whiteness sells you, which is a lie. It sells you this lie of excellence and supremacy and all these other things. And what do you do when you're supposed to be sharing a faith that is supposed to be the greatest thing about you and your connection? I don't know if I have an answer, right? But the question in trying to get people to see themselves for who they are, like really, and then see that as different than what they've been told or what they've been sold or what they've been convinced of. And those things can be really hard because when you pull at somebody's identity, when you pull at how someone has built their lives and their understanding of themselves, those people around them, and others that they don't know, it's built around this reality that they don't even have words for. I have a very good white friend and a few, I have more than one, but this particular person I was talking to a few years ago, and she was saying, like, she understands that Black and brown people move and talk about life in the context of their race often, and that she said, I've never talked about whiteness with my family. That's never been a thing that comes up. So if you never talk about this identity that you have, but it is the identity by which you are able to move through the world and by which the world is built on, how do you make somebody see it and then let them know that the issues with this identity really affects not just other people who are outside of that identity, who are seen as other, less than, and marginalized, but it also is affecting them, the person who's benefiting from the identity as well. Because beyond whiteness, there's depth, right? You're not just white. Are you Irish? Are you Lithuanian? Are you English? And what do those ethnicities bring into your story, into your reality? What are your traditions? What's your food? What are the things that tied people together within that space? And it's not always roses. Like, what are some of the things that you like? Oh, we did that. Woo, that's part of my history. Oh, clutch my pearls. That doesn't sound good. And then what are the beautiful things? But to divorce yourself from those things and say, but we're just white. You lose the depth of who you really are and the story and the narrative that has existed for centuries, sometimes millennia, and you trade it in for something that promises you supremacy, access, privilege, power, all of those things. But what it doesn't tell you is you will have these things in this context, but the cost is you're going to be in shackles. You're going to be in bondage. But it's all right, because you on top. And when we're talking about Jesus, and I think about how Jesus warned us in various ways, especially through parables, about how it is so easy for us to miss the bondage that comes along with the gain of power, of position, of privilege, of any death-dealing kind of things, anything that is not life-giving. And shows us a different way. And that's kind of what Dr. Drew was talking about, is that there was someone presenting something that was a different way. And there's an opportunity to lean in and listen. And people weren't willing to, because what was being attacked, what was being called out was whiteness. And the whiteness was held so close and was so much a part of them. And it was who they were. And there was nothing else. If you took the whiteness away, there's nothing else that they know of. It's there, but there's nothing that they've connected to in their identity other than their whiteness. Well, what you mean? I'm not racist. I got a Black friend, whatever the things are. It's like, but can you listen and think about it? It's going to bring you into a hard place, but if there's freedom on the other side of the hard place, is it worth even considering what I'm saying about the reality of people who are different than you and what that might mean for your own reality. When you're hearing from somebody who is Black or brown speaking about their experience, and you having to identify in that experience as someone benefiting from and living in whiteness, and what does that mean for you? And saying, where are the words of Jesus in that whole experience? It's a lot to grapple with, but I see people starting to do that. I see people not just starting, I see people testifying of being on that journey for years. And my hope and my prayer is that this experience that Dr. Drew talks about, where students were unwilling to even hear, my prayer is that it changes and that people are ready to not just hear, but to lean in, truly consider, and get other perspectives so that they can divorce themselves from the false promises and the bondage of white supremacy and really discover who they are in a way that brings depth, meaning, story, tradition, and narrative like they haven't had before. All right, see y'all next time.